There's something a little bit more appealing to this shape versus this one.
I'm in emotion.
Hey guys, it's Irie. Today we're going to be talking about eye shapes. Eyes itself in general is going to be a really big topic, so I want to take it one step at a time. But to start our approach with eyes, it's good to understand the fundamentals of what makes a good, believable eye shape. And today we are going to be going over a lot of the common mistakes on animators when they're posing the eyes. Why is it important? Like, why are we talking about eyes? What are the things to look out for when it comes to storytelling, whether it's you're doing a drawing or you're actually doing a full-on animation, whether it's 2D or 3D, the behavior of the eyes is one of the most powerful nonverbal cues that actors use and also animators need to know about and study, especially when it comes to layered acting. The dialogue may be saying one thing, but the character could have a different intent, and that's where layered acting comes into play. And in a lot of ways, a really good animator could show those nonverbal cues through the facial expression itself. It's a huge topic on its own. There's a lot of meanings to not just the eye shapes, but also eye movements, the blinks and the pauses. How do you take those information and those analysis, bringing that into your workflow to deliver a really strong and powerful moment? We're going to talk about what are the common mistakes when we start posing our eyes. So, the very first one and the very obvious one, which is a dead and symmetrical eyes. So, as we are seeing in here, everything is just straight on to the center. Pay attention to the default position of the eyes when the model comes into you. Look at where the iris and the pupil are set on the sclera. A lot of the free rigs or rigs that you can purchase online, when they're modeled, everything is modeled at the center. So that includes the position of the iris and the pupil. Pay attention to the distance between the center of the pupil and the very corners of the eyes and see if that looks very, very symmetrical. So when something is symmetrical, it usually indicates something is mechanical or very robotic. So if you want to make your characters feel a bit more organic and more natural, your first step is to actually relax those eyes just like this. And it's a matter of just moving the eye aim controls a little bit closer. And the second part here is you don't have to move them exactly the same on one side or the other. So, in addition to refocusing your character's eyes by moving them inward, make sure that they're not completely mirrored on each other. So one could have a tiny deviation on it, and this is also something that you can definitely play around with. For example, if your camera is just slightly off to the side and you have a little bit of a quarter view to your character, then you can play around with moving the eyes just a little bit off towards another area. Number two, eye direction. Very typical issue that we encounter when animators are doing their blocking. It's very easy for the eye direction to be left out or posed too early and then not readjusted. Here we have a sample of an over the shoulder shot. Our main character in here is supposed to be looking at the grayed out character. And if you do not pay attention to the eye direction, it may very easily cause that the character is not focused or we're not sure who the character is talking to. For example, in this adjustment, our character is looking way too far on the other side. It's not focused. Sometimes we can also see issues where the character is looking too far up or down. And the same thing with the eyes of the character very easily can get wall-eyed, something like this. So even though it looks like one of the eyes look like it's focused on the grayed out character on screen left, there's something wrong here. It feels like the eyes are a little bit crazy. And it's because it's out of focus. So one of the eye is just way too far out on the other side, and it's not really looking at the character. The easiest way to fix this is, as I mentioned, pay attention to the distance between the corner of the eye and where the center of the pupil is. If that's feeling too symmetrical, that's one of your cues to refocus the eyes. Never put it dead center. And small adjustments like these can go a long way. Super small movements is going to make your eyes more towards that natural and organic feeling. I'm going to reposition the eye aim roughly where it's supposed to be looking at, which is the other character's eyes. If I do that though, notice how in the camera angle, it looks like she's looking way off to the other side. It can be an easy mistake for any novice animators going in and just constraining the eye aim to an object, but if you don't understand the relationship of the eyes to the camera angle that we are shooting with, it's not going to be very effective. You always have to not just pay attention to the location of the eye aim, but how does it relate to the camera angle? So if I move it roughly where she seems like she's looking at the other character, on 3D, you can see that she's looking more towards the side of her face, not quite centered at the other character. So that's an interesting thing with staging characters against a different camera angle that is not straight towards the front of the character. You might have to cheat the position a little bit just so that it serves and feels correct with our camera angle. Number 3, too much eye whites or too much sclera showing through the eyes. A lot of rigs online normally tend to have a cartoony shape where majority of the whites are showing, or they tend to go with like a very small pupil and iris. And depending on where you're going to be using that animation or that rig, if you are tending to not do too much cartoony type of animation, you will have to pay attention to that the amount of eyes showing, and you have to reshape and move them just so that the eyes feel more relaxed. Otherwise, the character will look like they're shocked or surprised at all times. And again, it depends on the type of character and the style of animation that you're doing. See, this is an example of a character design that normally has a huge amount of sclera showing around. And again, depending on the style that you want to do, this may be okay. If you don't want to do super cartoony style, you'll have to go and reshape a lot of this for it to look a bit more natural. Usually there's just one side where, let's say, the lower part of the eyes are showing a little bit more eye whites. So in some people this can be very natural. The same thing when the character is looking down, and I do notice this a lot from students and animators alike when they go and move the eyes down and leaving quite a lot of whites on top of the eyes. And this again is a very unnatural state. You don't want to leave a lot of gaps. Even when, as humans, when we look down, our eyelids will naturally follow. So pay attention to that and just make sure that your eyelids are actually touching the top of those eyes. So the next example that we have is when the eyes are buried into the eye sockets or one side or the other. This is very common when we're doing a lot of extreme facial expressions. And very often we want to really push the character, but pushing the character's facial expression doesn't mean exaggerating the position of the eyes to the point that we almost don't see the pupil anymore. And for example, I'm going to just move this really crazily towards the screen left. That's a little bit too unnatural. Like, we don't want to do too much of that. The same thing if we go up. Like, a good measure is that if you are getting close to the center or the midpoint of the pupil, you're getting a little bit too far. So you don't want to have your eyes getting cut too much when the character is looking off to one side or making an extreme eye direction or eye pose. So you'll want to just pull that back. A little bit more than half of the pupil. Again, this is one thing where you can never have both of the eyes perfectly mirrored, so you'll want to have a little bit of adjustment on one of them to support the direction the eyes are focusing on. So the next common mistake that I encounter with animators and juniors starting out is that the eyelids are not connected to the direction of the eyes, and just being aware of the fact that the eyelids actually tell most of the story. So what's very important to understand on eyelids is that the eyelids actually sell the emotion way more than the eyeballs or the direction of the eyes. I want to show a really easy example to understand what eyelid shaping is in relation to the direction of your eyeball and why that is basically a hit or miss in making your eyes appealing and really getting that believable shape. So if you notice in here, I am starting with looking straight to the camera. Notice where the peak is. The peak is always centered to where the midpoint of your eye is. Now, let's look at another example. I'm going to be looking over to the other side, and then I'm going to be looking up. When I look up, it's a little bit more prominent in here. The peak is going all the way to the midpoint, and that is the highest peak of our eyelids. And then when I look off to the side, it changes. It's a little bit more subtle in here, but the peak also changes. So that peak moves around with the changes of eye direction. This is a really good starting point. Even if you are just drawing or you're just looking for references on eyes and how to draw eyes, actually, it's a really important concept to understand. You're going to get a really, really good, appealing, and strong eye pose. So I want to take you guys through a full adjustment of a simple straight on camera angle. And again, we're only going to be focusing on this part of the face. This is already after refocusing the eyes, so the eyes are actually not dead centered. Start with like, are you happy with the position of the eyes? Does the character need to look a little bit more off to screen left or screen right? Do that first. Figure out the direction of the eyes and where the eyes are going to be sitting in the eyeball. Then you can start diving into reshaping the eyelids. Now, I want to show you guys something very interesting in here. To begin with, when you're ready to reshape the eyes, paying attention to the distances between the different parts of the face. For example, bisect the face in half and just observe how big this spacing is versus the spacing on the other side. How big is the space between here and the other side? And the same thing with the corner of the eyes all the way to the corner of the face. Sometimes it's nice to also pay attention to where the cheek line is and also looking at the distance between that one. Adding a symmetry to the face is breaking every single one of these lines. So it could be anything like making this eyelid slightly higher than the other. And that way it can support your cone. If your cone looks like this, then that's kind of the way you want to go. You can then expand the lower lid slightly. You can make this one a little bit higher. But not just that, those are the basic adjustments. You can go even further by either moving the eyes slightly a little bit, a few pixels inside towards each other. Again, depending on the expression, on what your goal is for the character, you can change any of that. The same thing with like compressing the eyes and making them slightly longer on the outside. That's also a possible way of adding a little bit of squishiness. Making those volume changes, when we talk about squash and stretch on the eyes, it's not just an even volume stretch of pulling this one up and then pulling this one down and calling that a stretch of the eyes. You will always want to remember that there is a very organic volume in here. So when you stretch the eyes, you're kind of just pulling one part and the rest kind of falls off. The same thing with the lower lids. Now, you can sometimes play around with the corners as well. You can pull the corners slightly inward to support that stretching shape. So a slight push in the eye corners in here, and the same thing on the other side to support that pull. If you want to then make a compression on your eyes, you can also do it in the same idea. So you can squint the eyes this way and then do the same thing in here. But notice that where does the volume go? There is somewhere that it must kind of bleed out into. And slight pulling out of that eye corner and the same thing with the other side, that already breaks that very monotonous shape that we start off with, which is the default model. So pushing it in and saying that your eyes need compression does not mean that it can come just by shrinking your eyelids, but also squeezing these one outward to support that volume change. Now, these lines and the direction of the lower lid right here, it has a bit of an upward shape to it. The same with the outer corner of our eye. Now, that can probably be okay, but have a look at these adjustments over in here. So again, this is the character at default. And you can actually grab the entirety of the eye on any control of your rig that lets you do that and rotate them a little bit so you can get something like this. So try to see the difference. Again, this is the one before. It's a really, really small adjustment. But what it does is this movement right there lifts up that outer corner of the eye to be a little bit higher. And it dips down the inner corner of the eye. There's something more appealing to this shape versus this one. So here are a few tips to remember. For shaping eyes, eyes are never going to look perfectly straight. So having a little bit of adjustment, so one eye is not perfectly mirrored than the other, that goes a long way of adding a little bit of organic touch to your posing. The eyelids sell way more emotion than the eyeballs or eye direction. So giving a really good supporting shape for those eyelids, they're going to support a lot more on your storytelling. And the last point is a few pixels, a little bit of touching here and there, subtle changes. All of those small things go a long way. It's going to be a really big help when you start doing acting, especially layered acting, and understanding all of these things. Again, there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more stuff on the brows as well, and how that connects to the lids. And there's also a huge subject on micro expressions that plays a really big part into layered acting. If you ever have shots that call out for that, understanding what those are and how to implement them in your posing into your timing, and just like the subtle visual cues of what eyes do when they move, when there's eye darts, how many eye darts are you doing when you're doing blinks, and the speed of the blink when the eyes start to kind of stop moving and focusing. What does that mean? There's a lot more to unpack in here. I hope that this is a really good start to get you introduced to a lot of the facial subtleties, just very simply shaping and posing your eyes, a little bit of in the brows as well. So I hope that there's something for everybody in there and that this video helped you kind of get started, figure out some of the small things that maybe had been overlooked and that you find helpful for your own posing and your own animation. If there's anything that you think that I missed, please let me know. And if you have ideas on other videos, also let me know. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you guys next time.